there are no apologies. And then on to item 4, the confirmation of the agenda. I'll move from the chair that we confirm the agenda with the following addition, that we, in regard to Standing Order 2.1, option C be adopted in relation to moving and seconding and speaking to amendments. Second to Councillor Staines. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 5, declarations of interest. I will also move from the chair that the council notes or amends, if necessary, the elected members' interest register attached as attachment A, and confirms the proposed management plan for elected members' interests. Second to Councillor Staines. Is there any discussion on that? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. On to the minutes of the committees, or the first one is council. I'll move from the chair that the council approves the minutes of the council meeting held on the 1st of August. Actually, I didn't chair that, did I? I might have to move that. I think it would be wise for the Deputy Mayor to move that, since I didn't preside at that. Councillor Wilson, you will second. So it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 7, Community and Culture Committee, Councillor Hawkins.
Tēnā Your Worship. I move that the Council notes Part A items numbers 1 through 9 of the minutes of the Community and Culture meeting held 15 August 2017. Further approves the following Part B items of the minutes of the Community and Culture Committee meeting held on 15 August, that being item 10, recalculation of rates relief grants, and C, takes Part C items of the minutes of the aforementioned meeting in the non-public part of this one.
Seconded. Councillor Lafiso. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 8, Economic Development Committee, Councillor Gary.
I'd like to move that Council notes Part A items and public forum of the minutes of the Economic Development Committee meeting held on the 14th of August 2017.
Second to Councillor Wiley. Any discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 9, Infrastructure Services Network Committee, Councillor Wilson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that the Council notes the public forum and Part A items 1 to 7 and 9 to 17 of the minutes of the Infrastructure Services Networks Committee meeting held on the 14th of August 2017, and approves the following Part B item, item 8, Parks and Recreation Strategy of the minutes of the Infrastructure Services and Networks Committee meeting held on the 14th of August 2017. But I may...
Seconded Councillor O'Malley.
And I think the CEO may have some words.
Well, she may. Is there any discussion? Just bear with us, Councillor Vandervis. We're endeavouring to make you audible. Start again.
I'm hoping that you will redact the false statement from the IF minutes that the balance of DCC urban cycleway funding was reallocated by NZTA to the one-way pair cycle project to ensure Dunedin still received the benefit from this fund. I have questioned Richard Saunders at the IF meeting about this. He confirmed at that meeting that the one-way pair cycle project was always going to be fully funded anyway, and that means that it's simply not possible for the statement that the funding was reallocated and that Dunedin still received benefit from this fund. It's not possible to be true, because the one-way pair was always going to be fully funded anyway.
Okay, we received your email on this, Councillor Vandervis, and despite its abusive nature, I took it seriously and asked the Chief Executive to confirm or not the veracity of the minutes, because it's important that they are right. This is about whether the minutes are correct or not. That is all it's about. So I'll hand over now to the Chief Executive to explain what she found out when she made her inquiries.
Yes, unfortunately both Ruth and Richard are away, so it did take a bit of time to get to the bottom, including discussions with NZTA. Richard was right when he said that the balance of the Urban Cycleway Fund had been reallocated within Dunedin to ensure that Dunedin still receive benefit. The bulk of it has gone to the one-way pier. He was also right when he said, and so was Councillor Vandervis, when they said that NZTA were always going to fund the one-way pier. This urban cycleways money has gone to improve the standard of the cycleway separation on the one-way pier. Please note, however, some of it has also gone to improve the standard of other pieces of cycleway infrastructure, such as the North East Valley cycleway. So the minutes are acceptable, I guess, as they stand, but it is worth noting that while the money stayed here in Dunedin, most of it was reallocated to the one-way pier. A small portion, though, went to some other cycleway projects to improve their standard.
So on that basis, Councillor Vandervis, we have established that the minutes are of an acceptable level of record of what happened at the meeting. Are there any other speakers? I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Item 10. Sorry? Recorded against. Yep. Thank you. Item 10, Planning and Environment Committee. Councillor Benson-Pope, sorry.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'll move that the Council notes the minutes of the Planning and Environment Committee held on 15 August 2017.
Seconded. Councillor Newell, sorry. You see what happens when I'm absent for one meeting? I forget all about you. Right, we'll move on to the reports. Item 11, financial result, period ended 31st of May. Who's speaking to that? Gavin. Welcome, Gavin.
Your Worship, did you actually put the motion for the planning and environment ones then? I know that when you did the second, I'm not sure that you actually put it.
Oh, well, then in that case, in my embarrassment at forgetting all of you, I didn't, so I shall. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Do you want to preface this with any comments, Gavin, or do you want to take questions? Great. So, questions, councillors? Any questions?
Yes.
Okay, fire away.
How much of the 6.185 million lower than expected grants revenue was claimed to be reallocated by NZTA to the one-way pair cycle project to ensure supposedly that Dunedin still received the benefit? How much of this 6.185 million lower than expected grants revenue was claimed to be reallocated?
How do these?
Just, it's voice activated, just talk.
Right. So the majority of the 6.185 actually relates to the Peninsula project, which hasn't yet commenced. So obviously that funding will flow through to the Peninsula project, which is due to start, I believe, in the next 6 months.
The question was, how much of this 6.18 million was reallocated to the one-way pair cycle project?
0.
Next question.
Sorry, I didn't get the answer to that.
The answer was 0. Next question.
Right. Given that none was transferred to the NZTA one-way pair project, how is it possible that that Dunedin received the benefit, still received the benefit of this reallocation if none was transferred?
Sorry, Councillor. Sorry, Councillor Vandervis, I misunderstood your question. None of the 6.15 million of lower expected grants was money we were expecting to get. The money from the Urban Cycleway Fund one-way pair will be produced and used for the one-way pair, the money that would have been used on the Central City Urban Network, as per my previous answer to you.
I would like it noted that none of this, I'm afraid, adds up, but I'll carry on with my next question, anticipating the Mayor. The year-to-date CapEx is $25 million down on budget, and on page 62 it seems to indicate that $11 million of this was water and $10 million of this was cycleways. Can you confirm that the year-to-date CapEx drop of $25 million on budget, as on page 62, was mainly for $11 million water and $10 million for cycleways?
The $11 million on water is correct. Transport is 10.725 million, which includes a number of projects, includes Peninsula, LED lighting, and then general renewals.
Thank you. And next question on page 63, it says that $120 million of debt has been protected with derivatives. How is this debt protected? Is it simply protected by fixed interest rates going forward, and for how long?
That's correct. There is a number of tranches of money in that things, but they are protected by interest rate swaps through Dunedin City Treasury.
So they're protected by a simple fixed forwards interest rate. Is that what you're saying?
Correct.
Right. Going to page 66, the net deficit of $14 million. Is this additional to or included in the $204 million debt?
This is just, Councillor, this is just the operating deficit for the year, which ties up to the summary on page 54.
Yes, but the net deficit, the 14 million, is that included in the $204 million debt figure, or is it additional to it?
Oh, it'll be part of the total funding for council. However, of the deficit, you need to understand, hang on a sec, let me just get to this page, that 4.3 of that relates to depreciation, which is a non-cash expense.
So the 14 million, apart from the 3.4, would then be additional to the $204 million debt?
No, it's part of the total bank balance that we have, which includes both bank balance and debt. The operating result.
Moving on to page 67, grants unfavourable of 6.6 million to NZTA. The DCC has a history of being unable to organise cycleways to achieve budgeted NZTA funding. Will the latest $7 million cycleway project that we ticked off last week, involving a new Leith cycleway bridge and moving the main trunk railway line to allow cyclists to straight run under the Wycliffe Overbridge, will that still go ahead if it becomes obvious that we cannot meet the NZTA funding deadline?
Councillor, I'm not sure that that's a question you can ask of the financial result. Can you move on to your next question, please?
I would like to know whether or not the funding... Oh, well, is there anyone else that I can ask that question of?
No, it's not appropriate in the context of this report. Can you move on to the next question, please?
Okay. On page 68, total expenditure up 11.6 million. NZTA grants down 6.6 million, year-to-date CapEx down 25 million on budget. That's almost half of the budget. Do you still have confidence, given that we've only managed to spend half of the budget, do you still have confidence in our budgeting, given the massive increasing variations we see in this report?
Yes.
That's a yes?
That's right.
Okay. Remarkable. But I'll move on. The Waipori Fund has been tracking well for 3 years. Gavin, have you considered catching up while it is valued highly and using the cash up to offset debt as a conservative move, given the potential for significant market instability in the near future, especially with North Korea, especially with today them shooting a missile over Japan? Have you considered cashing up the highly valued Waipori Fund?
I had a conversation with Gavin and said that this is not an appropriate place to answer that question. We have a councillor resolution, a number of them, about us holding the Waipori Fund, and simply to have the CFO off the cuff answer an opinion about his personal view about something where we have clear council directive that we hold the Waipori Fund is inappropriate. If the councillors wish to receive a report during the LTP on the wisdom or otherwise of holding the Waipori Fund, it would require a considerable amount of thinking and not just an off-the-cuff opinion, even from someone as eminent as Gavin.
With respect, Chief Executive, I sent this question to our most senior financial advisor 2 days ago. It's not off the cuff, and it is on the agenda. And I find that all of my questions are being battered to one side for reasons that I don't believe are appropriate. I want to know why I haven't received a written response to the questions that I've asked days ago, and I would like to know why it is that you claim this question is off the cuff when our Chief Financial Officer or Acting Chief Financial Officer has had this question and relevant information in front of him for several days.
Councillor, it is inappropriate and has been explained by the Chief Executive. So let me put it in words in a number of syllables that you may understand. It is not just off the cuff, it is inappropriate, as the Chief Executive has explained, for the Acting Chief Financial Officer to give an opinion on something that is actually under the purview of the Council to make a decision on. That is the main point. So please get on with your next question.
Are you saying...
please get on with your next question. I'm not discussing the previous one again.
My new question, Mayor Cull, is it inappropriate for us ever to ask an opinion of our Chief Financial Officer?
In this context, it is.
Your Worship.
Unbelievable.
Just for clarification, I'm not sure if there's a point of order. I'm just wondering if it's more appropriate that this is the financial result to this 31st of May. It's a backward-looking item, as in item 11. If there were questions on Waipori, wouldn't it be more appropriate for those to come under the next item, which is generally how we deal with it, which is the Waipori Fund itself? Albeit I appreciate that the financial year-to-date includes a mention of the Waipori Fund and how well it's done. Actually, any item under discussion on the Waipori Fund should be under the next item?
Yes, well, it might well be, although I stand by my judgment, but the next item is backward-looking as well. So, Councillor Vanavas, I invite you to ask your next question.
I don't believe, Mayor Cull, given that I have not had answers to any of the questions that I've put so far.
That's untrue, actually. That's untrue. You're not telling the truth there.
Questions in advance, in emails, and haven't had responses to any of these questions. I don't believe that it's actually even possible to get answers in this forum in this way, and I won't be asking any more questions of this item.
We're very grateful for that. Thank you.
I might like to just say to councillors, we do invite you to send through questions for council meetings, and particularly if you have complex questions that you wish to ask staff. Now, the purpose of that is not, and we don't generally respond by sending you the answers in advance, it's so that we can do the legwork and be prepared to answer your questions here in public. It's not to enable an individual councillor to have a separate interrogation of the reports by email. These are public meetings, and when they're public questions, we endeavour to answer them here in public. The only one that I had a problem with, Councillor Vandervis, was you asking the CFO if he had an opinion about the Waipori Fund, which may or may not align with the current council position. It would be rather like you asking Richard Saunders, do you like cycleways? It's irrelevant and inappropriate. We have a council position and his job is to deliver, and that's the same as for the Waipori Fund. If you wish as a formal council to go to my CFO and say, we want a paper to ask you what you think our best course of action is going forward on the Waipori Fund, then it would be perfectly appropriate for him to produce a written report that's been through the appropriate processes, that has engaged all the appropriate staff, and that comes to all councillors to discuss, but not just to give an opinion from his own mind in 2 days with no peer review and no ability for any other senior manager to have input.
Okay. Are there any...
What I understood from what you just said, Chief Executive, is that if there is a council position on something, that in fact we may not ask questions
Only whether you think the council should change its position. That needs to be done through a well-reasoned report, not just one person giving you their view in a meeting.
Okay. Are there any further? Councillor Elder.
I'm just asking a question. Year-to-date capital expenditure.
Councillor Elder, you just need to just press that, and that should.
That's it. Learning how to use this.
I know they're a bit tricky. They're a bit tricky.
On page 71, year-to-date capital expenditure, I was just wondering what the reasons were for that and what we can do to actually do something about that, you know, in the sense that we've only used 54% of the year-to-date budget.
That's just based on the comments. There is a number of key projects that have been delayed. For example, the peninsula widening, LED lights. We had a Kaikoura Valley 3 was tendered and then the tender was pulled. So there's a number of those large projects that create the variance. In addition, things like Ross Creek, because of the consent delays there, there's been delays in actually spending that money to get the work done. Obviously that project's underway. The peninsula is about to start. The LED lighting's in train. Kaikoura Valley 3 is obviously still up for debate. So it's really around some of those really large projects where we're just getting those small delays. But that obviously has a role on it in terms of financials.
Councillor Garrett.
Mr Logie, I wonder if you could just explain it in a little bit more detail about on page 67, Ulverston revenue unbudgeted in the current financial year. I think I know the answer to it, but I'd like to hear it from you.
Yep, so just for the benefit of councillors, so Ulverston used to be previously accounted for outside of council. Having reviewed a number of the documents that support the Ulverston operation, we concluded that actually the reporting should be done within council. So it was just unfortunate we did that. We sort of worked on that at in June last year, which obviously was post the budget being completed.
And there's both income and outgoings, both sides of which roughly tally up, and they're both unbudgeted.
Councillor Elder, you have another question.
I do. On page 73, just understanding the debt related to the Dunedin project.
So that balance there is the amount of money that's owed for Dunedin. So effectively we have lent or advanced to the community $3.378 million, okay, which includes the interest associated with that, like those loans. So they come off their rates on over a 10-year period.
So that's accounted as an asset?
It's counted as an asset, and then obviously as the money comes in, it offsets that asset.
Any further questions? There being none, You'll move Councillor Staines, seconded Councillor Wilson. That's the motion on the books, on the paper. Any further discussion? I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. No. Thank you, Councillor Van der Vest. Yes, we heard that. Thank you. Item 12, Waipori Fund, year ending 2017. Questions on this paper? Councillors? Councillor O'Malley.
Just on page 78, am I correct in saying that 6.9% is the annual return on the Waipori Fund currently? Correct. And how does that relate to our average interest rates we're paying on city debt?
So city debt's currently sitting around 6.2.
So we are currently earning more from the Waipori Fund,
correct,
as an investment than we would if we were to loan against it. Great, thank you.
Any further questions, councillors? Happy to move. Councillor Wilson. Second, Councillor Lord. Any discussion? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right, item 13. Thank you, Gavin. Item 13, long-term plan update and second round of supporting documents. Welcome, Maria, Nicola and Tammy. Now, do you wish to introduce it? Yeah.
That's okay.
Far away.
Good afternoon. This latest LTP update presents you with two elements of the LTP process for you to consider, both of which are critical to enable us to move forward with the next phase of the LTP. So the first one is the community outcomes headline indicators, which we're asking you to approve for the purposes of community engagement. So we talked with you in May about some headline indicators, and the set that you've got in front of you today for adoption reflect the feedback that you gave us about housing and economic indicators, and the key changes are set out in paragraph 10 of the report. The other element is the revised significant and engagement policy. The most substantive change is the inclusion of a new section on materiality, and just asking you to note that the adoption of this policy is critical in terms of it being the test for which of the elements are included in our future engagement on the plan.
Okay, I'll open up for questions. Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. My first question is around the indicators, and as someone who's responsible for this coming back a second time around, I appreciate the work that's gone into this, but my understanding was that under economic development we were essentially using GDP growth as a proxy for people's individual success. It's GDP per capita, and now with the additional indicator is ability to cover costs of everyday needs. Is it necessary to have both, given that across the rest of the strategic framework it's been decided that two is enough? I mean, are they not trying to do the same thing, but framed from different angles, is my question.
I think we put the other one in as discussed, but I think to take out the GDP measure might sort of cause quite a lot of difficulties in seeing what is going on in the city if you take that measure out at this point. We've used that measure since the economic development, well, before that, but since the economic development strategy has been in place. So my advice would be that you maintain that measure for at least the next LTP, add in this additional measure and see how it pans out.
And at which point would know whether an increase in GDP corresponded to an increase in people's ability to cover the costs of everyday needs. My other question is just around the schedule under the significance and engagement policy, where the assets are listed and previously said included and now says are, which 2GP drafting protocol aside suggests to the average reader that that's an exhaustive list I mean, I appreciate that there's a clause following that says other things could qualify, but what is that the intention, that it's an exhaustive list, and at this point, should we be adding them at this meeting?
Thank you. Yes, that is the intention, that the significance and engagement policy states what the council considers as strategic assets as of the date of adoption. However, as Councillor Hawkins alluded to, any other asset or group of assets can be considered significant. And this list just clarifies that if the council is considering changing the ownership of such assets, that there would be a special consultative procedure undertaken.
And just following on from that, is it the intention, or does it need to be made expressly clear in the policy that are they for the whole or part of these assets that are listed in the schedule? So were someone to want to develop part of Logan Park, is that a significant asset, or part of any collection, or part of anything that's on this list?
I refer to on page 97 or page 9 of the significance and engagement policy. The second dot point for the notes states that where a strategic asset is a network or has many components, decisions can be made on individual components within that asset or network, without it being regarded as significant.
So would that cover, for instance, if we were to divest of part of Dunedin City Holdings Limited under this policy, it could be assessed as not requiring a special consultative procedure to consult with our community?
So the principle of the significance and engagement policy is to state how we assess significance. So there's a criteria for that. So for whatever decision the council is intending to make, you would assess the significance of that and then consider the most appropriate way to engage with your community. So this schedule of strategic assets, it's required by the legislation, but it does not limit council's ability to engage with their community on decisions that are significant.
Thank you. There may be other people may have suggestions for things they want added to, so I'll seek advice, Your Worship, as to how you want to handle potential amendments to the schedule if this is in fact the forum that we are to do that in. Rather than running all this individual amendment, I don't know how you want to proceed with that. But
given that we need to finalise it today, I imagine that if we're going to amend it, that today is the time to do it, as long as that's not too challenging. So we'll get through questions and then we'll have suggestions as to any alterations or amendments. Councillor Benson-Pope.
Thank you. It's on the same issue, and I'm just giving notice then that I will move that we change the wording, because I share the concern about the list looking exclusive, and I note that there are some omissions. Could I ask about a couple of them? For example, the Waipori Fund is not included on this list, which would seem germane after the conversation we've just had, nor is the Civic Centre, nor is the Saltwater Port. Would you like to comment on why that is?
Yeah, I'm afraid, and we can't answer that directly. And can I just suggest that maybe, given, while I did say earlier that it's imperative that we get this signed off sooner rather than later, given that you're raising a number of questions, perhaps we'll come back, we'll take those on board and come back at a subsequent meeting and get this signed off, because we can't answer the question on the spot.
Well, my understanding from what Councillor Benson-Pope said is that if the wording were changed, not with the necessary addition of any other strategic assets, but just to make it clear that the list that's included isn't final, then that may suffice, and we wouldn't need to rack our brains and think of everything that might be missing now.
we can certainly make that change to show that the list isn't exclusive.
Right. So can we?
Exhaustive.
We'll just hold that and we'll amend it when the time comes, because there may be more than one. Councillor Wiley, you have a question.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just on page 88, integrated transport. Can you just explain what would come under the heading number of fatal and serious injury crashes?
As I understand it, that covers all modes of transport, and it's where someone has been fatally injured or injured.
Okay, so when I look at some of the other questions, it talks about percentage of residents, and things like that. Wouldn't we already have that information from NZTA, etc.?
That would be where we would probably be drawing that information from. I don't know without going into the detail, but all of these measures, they're not things that we've created or are collecting new data on. For the most part, that they're drawing from other sources that exist.
Okay, and what would be the type of outcome you would get, or what would be the result that you would try and get from that information? So I'm just trying to get my head around why are we asking that question?
I think because there's a focus both at the national and at the Dunedin level on safety of our roads, and so that shows through in our integrated transport strategy as a key ambition to have safer transport modes. So I think that's why that is the suggested indicator for that.
Okay. Thank you.
Further questions? Councillor Elder?
Hi, I sent through an email to everybody just related to the core values and public participation, and I note the significance and engagement policy does embed a lot of that which Nicola actually sent me through, and I recognise that. But one of the things I was wanting was that in fact they reflect a core set of values, because values tend to drive behaviour rather than policy. And so I just proposed the IAP2 core set of values that I sent out to everyone, and wanting to sort of embed that into, or make it overt, that these values are what we hold dear when it comes to public participation. So I was wanting to, one, debate that, and two, then to make a notice of motion to amend the significance and engagement policy so that it makes it overt what our public participation values are that drive our significance and engagement policy.
Okay, can I make the comment that I saw what came through, and if it were to be debated with a view to potentially adding it, I suspect that to do it justice, we would have to spend quite some hours on that. So I don't think it's practical to do it today. However, I think there's a prior question to ask, and that is, and maybe the Chief Executive or the team can answer it, and that is, to what extent are those core values already incorporated or in the thinking and in the way this was developed in the first place? And that may give you some reassurance that actually what you're proposing, which looks very sound, is actually part of the foundation of this in the first place. So can I ask I don't want to put a question in your mouth, but I think to some extent that's what you're asking. So can I ask the team to comment on that?
Yes, we can confirm that the values and the principles of the IAPP were sort of fundamental to the development of the significance and engagement policy, and the table that we circulated shows that even though the values aren't explicitly, they're not stated in the same way as they are in the IAPP, they're integrated into with the principles in our objectives and principles of the SEP.
Going on from that, Councillor Elder, can I suggest that because I really think it's impractical to pull it apart and put it back together at this meeting, that we look at, if all of these things are iterative, all of these things we review from time to time, and there will come a meeting and a workshop in the future when we look at it again, where we can perhaps go back to first principles and look at whether there's a way of improving it. And that would take account of what you're suggesting.
Thank you.
Councillor Gary.
Just a follow-up question that might be helpful. Could the team explain the consultation, the extensive consultation that went into forming this policy in the first place?
So when the significance and engagement policies first came in November, there was a requirement. I think there was some new legislation. So the legislation came in August, and there was a requirement for a significance and engagement policy by the 1st of December 2014. There was extensive community engagement. It was under the banner of big decisions, big conversations with our community. We held some workshops and forums with stakeholders. We did a people's panel survey and went around pop-up events around places like the farmers market with councillors. And I can't remember off the top of my head the number of responses we had, but I think it was in the high hundreds. So.
And do I remember correctly that you did extensive consultation with community boards?
Yes, that's correct, and also with our Māori Participation Working Party.
Councillor Hawkins, you had a question. Oh. Putting that. Councillor O'Malley.
Are we going to discuss the Schedule 2 later, or is it time now to ask any more questions on Schedule 2?
Sorry?
The Schedule 2 with the currently the council strategic assets. Are we going to discuss that later? I've got two questions. I just want to know if
yeah, I think if it's involved in this report, ask them now.
Okay. Well, okay, back to this Strategic Council's owned assets, section 2, which is on page 97. The bit that struck out, you basically, the first sentence, the council may consider any other assets, is now what's put down in the notes, verbatim basically. And then the other part struck out as some examples of strategic assets are, and you've changed that to currently the council's strategic assets are. I see that if you didn't take that at all, it didn't change that at all, you would have a list that says this is basically an example of what we think are strategic assets, and it doesn't necessarily include them all, which isn't that the objective, because just because the oval's missing, and so are all sports playing fields. Yeah, that's one question.
Thank you. We amended that wording because and I'll quote from the Local Government Act here, says under section 76AA, the significance and engagement policy must list the assets considered by the local authority to be strategic assets. So technically we didn't meet that requirement with the original significance and engagement policy because it wasn't an exhaustive list. So that's why that has been corrected with this policy.
We've made this list the exhaustive list, but we haven't added anything to it. So is this truly an exhaustive list of our strategic assets?
Sorry, to be accurate, Jim, we developed that list originally with councillor input and with community input, and you have the right to amend it, but the legislation just requires that you list what you see as your strategic assets.
Because I mean, we did have a small workshop on this and discuss the wording of this point. I guess that could have been an opportunity to potentially add more strategic assets at that point. I assume then we are going to visit this by adding more that we can think of then. If we're obliged by law to actually identify everything we consider a strategic asset.
Well, I think I need to clarify what seems to me a conflict between what we decided before by way of changing the wording so that it wasn't exclusive, but now I understand that we are required to have an exclusive list. So how do we resolve that?
Yes, apologies that my initial advice was not correct, and Tammy's read from the legislation. So we are required to have an exhaustive list. So we could either seek to do that now, or come back to you at a later stage.
I don't think we can safely do it now on the hoof. So I wonder whether we can conclude, adopt, as the paper says, the motion proposed, adopt the rest of it with a view to amending the list later. Okay, I'm advised that we are likely to have an extraordinary council meeting and need an extraordinary council meeting in a couple of weeks. So the way forward, I think, is to adopt all of this except the list, and in the intervening couple of weeks, work on making the list as exhaustive as it needs to be for under the legislation. Is everyone comfortable with that? I think that's the best compromise. But we at least get the rest of it out of the road and confirmed and adopted. Okay. Councillor O'Malley.
Now, I don't know if Councillor Vandervis is about to say something. Just to...
the extraordinary meeting. I believe the whole item needs to be left on the table. You just can't pick and choose bits out of it.
Point of order, Your Worship.
Point of order.
And it's a unique quirk of our phoning in system, but I would acknowledge that Councillor O'Malley was mid-sentence when Councillor Vandervis chimed in with his motion. I'm not comfortable for him to go on the speaking list, but I don't think it would be orderly for that to be a process that we continue with. It's not his fault. He can't see or read a lot of the body language that's going on in this room, but before that progresses, I think we should deal with things one at a time.
Well, my ruling is that we are in question time, but I had already indicated that I was going to move in a certain direction. So, unfortunately, Councillor Vandervis, your premature motion is more than premature, and you can debate it when we discuss the motion. Councillor O'Malley, do you want to carry on with your question? Councillor Vandervis, we're in question time and Councillor O'Malley is speaking.
Okay. With the community engagement policy, as it came in effect in 2014, and with that we have a number of capital works that we're heading into, and we did a major capital works back between 2014 and now, which would be the South Dunedin Cycleway, which probably did not get many points for community engagement or community endorsement once it started kicking off. So do we have a mechanism of determining and measuring whether our engagement policy was effective? And if we get a sense that potentially it was not, a mechanism by which we can modify it?
Yeah, that has been raised previously by elected members, and subsequently I've had conversation with Susie Ballantyne in my team, who's our sort of evaluation and monitoring sort of expert in the team, and we think we can add in some evaluations of some of our consultations each year into our monitoring evaluation programme, and then that would feed back in.
So that outcome would reflect some kind of success component of we said this and the public perceived this and everybody is or is not happy. Okay, thank you.
Councillor Vandervis, I've just taken some advice, and as I understand it, what you're proposing is a procedural motion. Now, it isn't appropriate during question time, but it will be appropriate when we get to the time for discussion. So can I come back to you then after we've finished all the questions?
I'd appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you. Right. Are there any further questions? Councillor Lord.
Councillor Vincent Pope bringing up the fact that we've got assets that aren't on this list. I just wonder if we should also have all the council companies that are not, they are strategic council-owned assets. They're not the same as this list, but they are companies and they are assets of that.
So I will ask staff to come up with a process or some kind of mechanism following this meeting to collect all the suggestions for strategic assets to be added to this list. So we just need to make it comprehensive. Well, it's not so much that the list needs to be comprehensive, the process needs to be comprehensive so that nobody feels that they've missed out making a suggestion. Right, are there any... Councillor Hall.
But also take into consideration our drainage, our roadage, the whole lot. They're already in there.
Yep, that's right. Okay, are there any further questions? There being none. So, Councillor van der Vis, you're proposing a procedural motion.
Yes, that item 13 lie on the table until the next full council meeting, okay. Extraordinary or otherwise. I need some, Sandy, I need some advice, please, as to process here, just to make sure we get this right. So it's been moved that, by way of procedural motion, that this lie on the table rather than be dealt with now. Is there a seconder for this, please? There being none, the lapses for want of a seconder. Councillor van der Vis. Now we move on to the actual motion that's before us. For the purposes of this, I will move that we adopt, for the purposes of developing the long-term plan 2018 and consulting with the community outcome headline indicators of attachment A, and B, adopts the revised significance and engagement policy at attachment B, with the exception of the Schedule 2 strategic council-owned assets. Is there a second? Councillor Staines, I invite discussion on this. There being none, I'll speak to it very briefly. This is part of a process that we're going through to establish our long-term plan for the purposes of consultation. As has been pointed out, it is absolutely required that we have it in place, and it is also a requirement we have it in place within a certain time frame. But I acknowledge that the part that we've left out, the schedule of strategic council-owned assets, has to be right and it has to be exhaustive under the regulations. So we will address that and bring that to the next meeting, which I understand, as I said, will be an extraordinary council meeting in a couple of weeks. That said, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. Received that. Right, thank you, team. Item 14, change of purpose of reserve land adjoining the Whiro stream and dedication as a legal road. Welcome. Well, Christy, do you wish to say anything before we kick off? Now, questions on this item? Councillor Wilson.
Thank you. I'm just wondering how much the developer in this case is paying for this reserve land, or in order to have access over it. I'm appreciating that it changes in our name to transport, but did any money change hand for the benefit of providing for the development in this way? Your Worship. Not that I'm aware of, no. In light of the discussion on the previous item where we talked about land and someone raised the issue of parks and reserves and being on the list of significant assets, and in light of this being only part of a reserve, it's just an interesting place to put our heads in deciding whether part of a reserve changing to a transport operation within council as opposed to outside of council. Would this ever be considered in your minds, and having dealt with this as a significance, to bring to council in any other format, or requiring consultation with the community?
So, answering that question at a high level, every decision that comes before council has to have a significance assessment performed, and you'll find that in the summary of considerations on the reverse of all reports there is a significance assessment done, and in this instance it's been assessed as low, so it doesn't require us to use a special consultative procedure.
Councillor Elder.
Question, it may be an aside, but given that it's a stream in a floodplain, I am just wondering what the development has considered in that light, especially given that we've just had a flood out there.
I think you'll find that this is probably not something that this team can answer, because that would have been dealt with in the resource management, or the resource consent process, and would have been, right or wrongly, it's not a silly question, but it's just not a question for here, because the team have been looking at the planning side of it subsequent to the resource consent being granted, and they would have considered that. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I just had a question. When I look at the photograph, which was page, I can't see a page number, item A anyway, attachment A, and then I look at the photo on the plan on 109, I'm trying to work out that whole area that's inside the white, the current reserve area, will that be used for, I just can't understand what the process is going to change. Surely that's not going to turn into road. It looks like they're just going to take a wee bridge across the stream, and that'll be access, and all the houses that border onto that line will take their access from another street. Is that right? And page 109, they'll go straight through that, well, it's marked number 101.
Yes, so the page 109, as you're looking at, defines the area that we're dealing with today. Attachment A is the wider Esplanade Reserve area, the whole area.
Yep. So that wider Esplanade area that we're looking at, the bit that looks like a crescent of a bottle opener or something, that will that be used for what? They're actually going to build a road on it or not?
No, the only bit that's being dealt with in this report is the bit that's defined on the SO plan and that page 109.
Yep.
Yeah. So the remainder of the reserve stays in its current status as Esplanade Reserve.
Don't see any advantage in us keeping it, because I think in future there will need to be quite a major lot of work done in that area with the number of infill, and there's proposals further upstream for more area to be. I wonder if it would be a good water retention area, but you're saying it won't lose that ability.
It's correct. So that rest of that area will remain with the council as a local purpose reserve.
Oh, okay. Yep.
Further questions? Councillor O'Malley.
This has already been consented, I assume, right? So it's actually, this is more just a curiosity question. Do you know what, I can't read what the green dotted line next to the main south line designates. Runs through sections 53 to section 65. Kind of moot because it's already been consented, but I'm just curious.
sorry, I've lost it on the screen. I guess the short point is that it's not related to...
Yeah, it's a moot point.
meeting.
I was just, maybe we'll find it later.
Any further questions? Councillor Wiley.
I take it under the option 1 recommendation, point 2, that and provide easy vehicle and utility access would be the wording?
Or ease of, yeah, correct.
Further questions? Councillor Lofisa.
You, Mr. Chair. Just asking about paragraph 6 in terms of the ecological values, especially as a place for mana whenua to gather. It's a mahinga kai area. So I note that in paragraph 25 you say that there's a perceived reduction in terms of it being an open reserve space. So my question just relates to how do we actually consult with or establish with mana whenua that developments aren't going to impact on those ecological values and customary uses?
Again, the resource consent process really would have dealt with those matters primarily, and the conditions of consent did include significant enhancement to the water margin there, including planting, and so it's going to benefit the values of the stream. Yeah.
Other questions? Okay, there being none, would someone like to move? Councillor Newell? It is Newell, isn't it? Seconded Councillor Garrick. Any discussion? Councillor Newell, do you wish to speak to it? Councillor Garrick? There being none, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Aye. Carried. Thank you. Right, on to item... Thank you, Christy. Thank you, Paula. On to item 15, DCC Transport Plan for the Regional Land... Program for the Regional Land Transport Plan. Welcome. Now, do you wish to introduce this, or do you want to go straight to
Hello, my name's Nick Sargent. I'm Manager Transport Strategy in the Transport Group. I'd like you to take most of this report as read. However, there was one paragraph in paragraph 23 where we are able to add in some figures now that were not there before. So for the maintenance budget for 2018-19, that will read 10.5 million. Oh yeah, page number 4 of the report, but
paragraph 23.
Paragraph 23 on page 114 of the... So just to repeat that, the maintenance element will read 10.5 million in 2018-19, and the operations and renewals element will read 11.4 million in 2018-19. That's all questions now. Thank you.
Yeah. Questions, councillors? Any questions? Councillor O'Malley.
It's just a quick timing question. We have to get this report into the Regional Transport Committee in 3 days, according to the report. So it's not really much opportunity to be able to do much change, obviously, and still get in on time. And one thing I've noted is that in terms of our planning, we look a little bit under-resourced. Was this a resourcing issue, and do we have enough staffing to get this stuff done in time so we can get the work done?
That possibly better answered by me than a member of the team. We have recently given Richard Saunders' permission to increase the staffing in this team by 9, and there will be additional, well, across the board to enable them to have better capacity, if you like.
Councillor Gary.
Thank you, Your Worship. I have a peripheral question. The projects listed on 112, page 112, at Council we passed a resolution that the art and infrastructure policy would be implemented immediately, as I understood it. I may be wrong about that and the timing. And I was somewhat surprised recently to discover, when I was attending a Peninsula Connection community workshop, that the designers had absolutely no knowledge whatsoever of that policy, but I believe it was a timing issue, and I totally accept that that may be the case. My question is around will the rest of these projects, will that kick in at design level, and how do we attend to that in terms of the projects where the timing didn't quite fit the design?
It certainly is our intention that that policy will be given effect to by all infrastructure projects from now on, and any that were in place that we've been able to retrofit, so to speak. So yes.
Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just following on from Councillor O'Malley's question around the urgency around making this submission, I note in the report it mentions that there are several other points where this can be amended, and I'm assuming that means items can be removed or items can be added apropos of our public forum. Can we get a bit of an idea as to what those milestones are, or at what point things can be added or amended, and how that work program is managed? Thanks.
So in round terms, what you're approving today is the initial bid to NZTA. There is a draft and a final stage to go through. What appears in today's report and will be the subject of consultation by the ORC for their regional land transport programme will be as you approve today. So there are a few more bites of the cherry, so to speak, as we go through the process over the coming months. But the final cut-off deadline, as I understand, is May next year.
Councillor Wilson, did you have a...
I've got one question,
yes.
but I'm happy to, also to indicate I'm happy to move.
Yep.
My question is on the Mosgiel Town Centre and arterial routes, which is at 100,000 still unfunded. It's been a matter that's been on the Mosgiel Taira Community Board, and I think for many people who drive through or near that place, mine for some time. And I'm just wondering whether 100,000 is actually substantial enough, considering some of the issues out there, and whether and what it requires to become funded, really.
The 100,000 is really for the planning phases of the project, which would occur in the last year of the 3-year cycle we're bidding for. Once we get to that phase, we will then have a greater idea of what we need to ask for and what will be implemented in future funding cycles.
Without wanting to say it's incorrect, but I suppose what I'm trying to do is ensure that 100,000 is substantial enough to do that planning work, given the fairly spread out nature of the issues out there, and your confidence in that 100,000.
The 100,000 should be adequate for us to get to that first planning gate, which is the programme business case for, and then that will identify the money we need to ask for downstream.
On that basis, I'm happy to move.
Seconded Councillor Elder. Councillor Wilson, do you wish to speak to this?
I will say that there's going to be an interesting long-term plan discussions that will take this further, and look forward to that discussion at the long-term plan without predetermining any of the other issues right now.
Are there any other speakers? Councillor Gary.
I think this is a significant document, a significant report, And I particularly want to note the projects including the Peninsula Connection, Dunedin Urban Cycleways, City to Harbour Connection, and the impact that that's going to have on the economic development of our city and the opportunities it raises, including a near marathon length harbour cycleway for our city. So I'm looking forward to seeing this work roll out, and I think this plan is very significant for our city.
Councillor O'Malley.
This is a good plan, but in terms of the dates and the timelines, the Regional Transport Committee will basically look at this in September to October, so November 1st it goes out to public consultation, and I doubt there'll be much opportunity to meet the public consultation requirements to do any modifications after that. So I think if we are any plans or any modifications, we've got about 8 weeks, so I think this probably what we've got in front of us is more or less what we're going forward with. And so the only feedback I have is probably to the CEO is to, this is effectively another long-term plan, a 3-year plan, so what we're doing now affects our ability to get NZTA money for the next 3 years, and certainly 3 years in from now, I hope that we've got a bigger lead into it, so make sure we've got everything on that list. But I'm happy with the list.
Further speakers? There being none, Councillor Wilson, do you wish to exercise your right reply? So I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Thank you. We got that. Yes, we got that. Standard. Now, on to Easter trading policy. Item 16. Easter Sunday trading. Yep. Yep. Councillor Hawkins. Oh, you wish to ask? Move, ask? All of the above. Welcome, Adrian. Welcome, Simon. Do you wish to introduce this before?
Yeah, I've got a couple of, through the chair, just a couple of comments. Just a quick update. We gave it a bit of an environmental scan about what other councils have done so far. You'll be aware, most recently Auckland Council decided not to adopt a policy. But across the country, almost half the councils have an Easter Sunday trading policy, so about 28 councils. The policy, as you'll see, just gives a choice to shops and businesses whether they open or not. Timing is quite critical in the sense that the Act sets out a timeline so that employers have to consider and decide if we do adopt a policy and tell their employees that they will require them to work. So that employers have 4 to 8 weeks to decide and then let employees know. And then employees have 14 days to let their employers know whether they will be available for work on Easter Sunday. And the Act does say explicitly that employees' decisions are their own decisions and they have the ability to refuse with no penalty. The other thing to note, obviously, is the Ed Sheeran concerts coming up over the Easter weekend. Obviously, and timing is critical that we decide, we consult with our community around that decision. And the only other thing I wanted to say was the review period under the Act does prescribe a 5-year or less review period. If the council was of a mind, it could consult on whether a shorter review period was more appropriate. But we didn't include that in the report as it currently stands, but if it's so minded, the council could choose to review, obviously, and consult on that as part of this consultation, and anything between 1 year and 5 years for the review period.
Well, I'll just kick off questions to absolutely clarify that this decision today is about whether we consult on having a policy.
That's correct. It's so the council could choose at this point not to consult on a policy, and some councils have chosen not to do that.
But this is not a decision about a policy.
No.
It is about whether we consult on whether we have a policy.
That's correct, yes.
Yeah. So, questions? Councillor Hawkins.
Indicating willingness to move option 2 when the time comes to take no further action in developing a policy.
Right. Okay, I've noted that. Councillor Lord.
My question was for Mr Pickford, if he can hear, or for Adrian, whoever. Look, my question, noting what the Mayor said, noting that Aaron has moved for option 2, my question is, while you say, and it's not totally relevant, but you say that in this situation an employee could make a decision to not work on that day, but you know, Easter spans for perhaps 5 days, and people historically would, well, a lot of people go away, and I'm just wondering if the pressure does, I sort of really was thinking of Christine's question earlier, that the implication that by default someone actually might as well stay and work a day they don't really want to work because they have to work through other days and that sort of thing now, and I'm just wondering, is there a view that you could be completely at will to say, no, I'm not going to work, and actually not have repercussions further on? Because I think by stealth the employer tends to have the advantage there, but can you explain that?
I guess the all I can comment on really is what's prescribed in the Shop Trading Amendment Act, which basically does prescribe some, I guess, under the Employment Relations Act as well, the protection for employees. But your point's well made. But I guess what the council at this point has to consider whether it wishes to create a policy or not. I know this was a major issue that Auckland grappled with, and as you say, whether employees really have the right to refuse or not, and then have that ability with no repercussions further down the track. And that's, I think, one of the things that Auckland that swayed Auckland in the end.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm intrigued with your noting the Ed Sheeran concerts that are coming up at Easter and the import that they may have on Easter trading. And so I'm just wondering, are you expecting that people coming to Dunedin need to go to a plumbing shop? I doubt it. And so then I'm thinking, what is it that will come, what commerce do people think they will get that can't open already, given the limitations under the Sale of Liquor Act as well, that will have to be meals that won't just be drinks that people can do on a Sunday anyway. What shops won't open, or will be able to open that you see being marketed because of the Ed Sheeran concert?
Through the chair, I don't have a view myself. It's, I guess that's for, and that point has been made. I mean, if you want to come to Dunedin over that Easter weekend, enjoy the art gallery or enjoy the any of the cultural facilities or the outdoors, that's all available. But I don't have a view about which shops should be open for people.
But the kind of shops we're talking about are shoe shops, clothes shops, acquisitions, you know, the kind of gift shops, the kind of shops that are closed on Easter Sunday, which is, you know, all of the others apart from a relatively limited range, garden shops. So remembering this report says, do you want us to go and consult the community, or do you just want to decide, basically, that this is, do you want to give your community to have a chance to come and see you in hearings?
Further questions? Okay. Councillor Hawkins has moved option 2, which would be to not consult. Is there a second? Councillor O'Malley. Sorry, Councillor Vandervis, I didn't pick that up. Oh, look, thank you, but Councillor O'Malley beat you to it. I could see him better.
Couldn't see your hand.
Right, Councillor Hawkins, I invite you to speak to this.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate...
You need your mic's not...
Occasionally necessary. Thank you, Your Worship, and I appreciate that it's not a common position for me to be standing here arguing that we don't hold public hearings. But I don't think, given the pre-engagement, the very effective pre-engagement that has been done during the process up until this point, that they would be particularly fruitful. The arguments are in front of us in the report attached to this paper, and I can't see any new issues being raised necessarily through what will be a fairly lengthy and no doubt resource-intensive process of having public hearings on the issue. This is essentially a values-based decision, whether people around this table support having the option of Easter trading rather than a numbers game at a public hearing, which comes down to whoever can muster the most troops, the Chamber of Commerce or the unions, as much as I do love sports. I think the spiritual argument is something of a red herring. We often hear that New Zealand is predominantly a secular country now, and how dare we acquiesce to people of faith in terms of how we set our public holidays. That's not why I think this is important at all, although I acknowledge that that is a deeply held view by some, and I acknowledge that for some, making a decision between business and our economic well-being and their own personal beliefs is a challenge, and I thank them for taking that seriously. But I think it's a red herring to use a secular society as an excuse to weaken the rights of employees in this country to 3.5 days of expected annual leave. Christmas Day, Easter Sunday, Good Friday and Anzac Day morning, that's all. 3.5 days is the only expectation that people have in terms of being given days off. I acknowledge the process that's been outlined by Mr Pickford and the comments that have been made by the Minister that nobody will be forced to work if they take that opportunity. That sounds great in theory, but I think it ignores the reality of the workplace situation, and Councillor Lord has alluded to that. It ignores the fact that we have people who are on 90-day trials who can be fired for no reason at all. It ignores the fact that if you have people working in situations where if you ask one too many awkward questions or some additional leave or your legal right, in some sad cases, to time off, that your hours may disappear next week and the week after and the week after, and all of a sudden you find yourself essentially out of a job. And that's not to say that all employers behave that way, most of them don't, but the role of regulation is to protect people from those who take advantage of a situation, and that's why I don't want to see us going down this route. I'd note that demand for a policy was somewhat ambivalent before certain announcements were made by the Dunedin Venues Management Limited, the giant cash register that is Ed Sheeran rolling into town, and that would perhaps be an argument were he only appearing once, but he's doing 3 shows. People will be here over the course of a week. You can't argue that by not trading in retail over Easter Sunday that the city will be missing out on this huge multi-million-dollar cash injection. And restaurants will still operate, as has been pointed out, and those who flout the current law will continue to flout the current law. There's not a lot that we can do about that, but we can stop the gate opening further, and I think that we should. I think it would be, it's very cynical to go through this process and suggest a shorter review period. It makes it more and more obvious that we're changing a fairly substantial piece of legislation for the benefit of one particular concert weekend in Dunedin, and that would be a huge issue for me. The expectation of visitors, 28 councils may have supported them, but in many smaller areas and tourist towns where I guess the pressure is more keenly felt. Auckland Council this week voted 20-1 against it. Wellington haven't gone down this path, Christchurch haven't gone down this path, and neither have Invercargill. And as Mayor Goff pointed out in that debate, if the government was so keen on having the option for people to trade on Easter Sunday, they could have just changed the legislation themselves without passing the buck and the stick and the costs of this process yet again onto local government. So I think that it would be disingenuous of me to support a public consultation process, a lengthy and expensive process, when I can't conceivably see an outcome of that process that would convince me that we can weaken the already limited rights that employees have in this city for the benefit of one big weekend shopping. Thanks.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm going to vote for this motion. I've been underwhelmed by the call for us to have a policy. We've had one presentation today who lodged late for the public forum, and I haven't heard a huge call for it otherwise. I'm concerned about the policy the act that got us to this point. It's a bit like doing freedom camping for me, and the only way to get consistency through the country, which we've been asked for in the consistency in freedom camping, is actually to vote with the other councils and not have a policy and not provide for it. It also minimises costs. This was an act that said we can't come to a decision, but we'll let 76 other councils, or take off the ORC, the regional councils, to go to the cost, a much more expensive cost to decide to adopt policies, and I wasn't happy with that process either. But I'd like to share my experience as someone who gave up 13 years of opening on Easter Sunday, and the number of people who came through, very glad that we were open, but we're even gladder that they didn't have to work. And I think that people really enjoy having their Easter holidays. It's a really cool part of Dunedin, of New Zealand, and for a whole lot of reasons. And there aren't many long holidays that are left that everyone does take. And for that reason, I'll be supporting this until I hear otherwise from the community, and it certainly hasn't been any note that people want it at the moment, that we stay as it is. So thank you.
Further speakers? Councillor Newell.
Thank you, Your Worship. I'm just a little concerned at the hypocrisy of some of the councillors regarding why they don't want to go to public consultation, that we'll get together a rousy posse who are going to come in and state their case. Surely that is the whole idea of public submissions and the process that you speak of, Councillor Hawkins, so often. Every possible opportunity. Get the public in, get the public in. We need to hear what the public need to say. This one, so it's not necessarily your view that concerns me, it's your reasoning for it. It's like you're scared you may go against you. And I mean, that is, you know, it's up to us. We've got a democratic process open to us to hear what our community wants. I can't understand on this particular instance that you've chosen that you don't want to hear from the public just because they may disagree with your opinion. I am ambivalent towards religious holidays or holidays in general. Most of us have to work at some stage, and it's like, I understand. I've also been on the fat end of casual labour and pressures there. That's an employment contract issue as opposed to a local bylaw regarding Easter trading, in my opinion. I think we need to tell those that we're asking to come to our city that we are open for business and we are ready for business, and we don't want to be left behind. If we want to be a realistic tourist venue, we've got to show the tourists in every way possible that we are here and we are open for business. And these 3 or 4 days a year aren't going to make a hell of a lot of difference to anyone. Whether you have, if you're not a religious person, as mentioned, not necessarily a secular society, it's not going to matter whether it's a Friday you have off or the Monday that you have off. So I can't be supporting this.
Councillor Garrett.
I want to see us consult with the community, and I want to talk about my experiences of working or being asked to work on Christmas Day and New Year's Day. Being in the hospitality tourism industry, that's part of what you need to be able to do. And yes, there is legislation that protects, and you do have to have confidence to be able to say no, but that opportunity is there. But what I have observed is that there's always somebody who is willing to work, and particularly in that industry where often the work is seasonal and limited, and the pay rates aren't fantastic, people are actually very happy to get an opportunity to get some more hours in during the season. And what I've also noticed is that there are some folk who are really happy to work. It all comes down to the quality of the employer and how they treat their employees. So what I've noted is that sometimes on these special holidays, an employer can make it a fun experience for their employees and treat them well. So for example, on Christmas Day, there is food there's treats and employees are treated particularly well when they agree to come to work on those days. So I think it does come down to the quality of the employee. I want to be part of a vibrant city, and I believe, given that tourism is such a growth area for our economy of our city, that we need to talk to our community and ask them what they think about this. And there will be many opinions. The spiritual aspect is one thing, depending on where your perspective is on that. And certainly having time off is important, but it is possible to take it at other times. And so I fully believe we should go out to consultation with this particular policy and see what our community thinks.
Councillor O'Malley.
I will be supporting option 2, primarily from the perspective of the relationship between central government and local government. This is an issue that should have been dealt with by central government, and in fact, the only reason we're facing it is because when we talk about whether or not you're safe to say no to your employer, remember that in this instance, the members of parliament were forced to vote on this election by their leadership. And in fact, when you talk about freedom and the chance to choose, whenever that was available, it never passed in Parliament. So it was only when freedom was taken from the politicians and forced to stay inside their system that this law came to us. This is like a baby with a dirty nappy, and they're giving it to us to change. And I have a feeling that basically what's happening is that those who want the change are rolling the dice. And as they lose in one gambling pit, they move it on to another one. And they're hoping that eventually Snake Eyes is going to come up in their favour and they're going to get what they wanted. I think that basically by allowing this to keep going forward, we're playing into the hands of those who should have made the decision in Wellington. And therefore my opposition is not about whether you do or do not believe in this, but whether or not in fact difficult decisions that should be made in central government should in fact be made there and not just handed on. Thank you.
Councillor Staines.
Well, I agree with the comment just made by Councillor O'Malley. I don't think that is a reason to opt away from consulting with our community on what they wish to occur. There are many, many of us as New Zealanders who work on the public holidays. Retail is one area, or one portion of retail is one area where that still does not happen. So I think, while I don't want to take a position either way, really, I think it's a community decision. I don't believe that we as a council should say, we're not going to consult on it because the government won't make a decision, we're not going to make a decision. We're not going to speak to our community because we know better. And I think that's a very dangerous position to take. I think we're better off exposing ourselves to the views of our community, listening to those views, and making a decision with that information, rather than today saying, no, we're not even going to consult on it. We're not going to risk our reputations of allowing this subject to be debated. So I think we should go for consultation on this issue, listen to the community carefully, and then make a decision weighted on what we hear.
Councillor Steedman.
Thank you, Worship. I actually concur with my friend here, Councillor Newell. It's not for us to make a personal decision on whether we should consult on this or not. We are here as representatives of our community. We are here to listen to them. I have heard on the other side of the coin from Councillor, differing from Councillor Wilson, from people that actually do want to know, and they do actually want to provide the opportunity for people to work for them during the time in the retail sector. So it's not about personal views. We should be going to the community and finding out what they want. The baby with the dirty nappy, someone has got to clean it up at some stage. It just gets too smelly. So we have got to actually tidy that up and get it clean again and make a decision. Because I certainly don't want a baby with a dirty nappy rolling around for too much longer. Thank you.
Councillor Lord.
You know, I won't be supporting this. I actually think Councillor Hawkins did give us the arguments very clear and very, you know, I don't actually doubt much of what he said, but I just think the decision is to be picked up and run from here, and I think that a hearings committee, it won't be solely down to a numbers game, or I hope it doesn't come solely down to numbers. It comes down to the quality and strength of the arguments, and while I do have some reservations for some people how it may affect them, potentially if you pass the law enabling Sunday openings, or Easter Sunday in particular, I think it is something that our community should have a say on, so I won't support this, but yeah. Thank you.
Councillor Wiley.
I think it's important that we actually hear from the community on this. As the chair of, if this proceeds, hearing, I think, you know, having just come off Freedom Camping and heard 250 or read 250 odd submissions, you know what, there was a lot of diverse views. I don't think we've got all the answers here, and I think it's important that we hear from the community, across the community, from all those that are engaged. The first thing is Easter Sunday is not a statutory holiday. Okay, it's not a public holiday. So is that a factor for some people? Is it a factor that, is it a religious reason? Is it they just don't want to work that day? There's a lot of arguments they can have about that day, about that weekend. But it's also about what our city wants and what our city wants us to do. It's about our community. There are retailers that would like to open. There's businesses that want to operate. And there's other businesses that won't. So let's hear from them. Let's not be afraid to hear from them. And I think the level of engagement so far has been because there hasn't been a lot of media locally here in Dunedin talking about it. There was when it was announced nationally, but we haven't heard from it recently. And I think this is a process that I think we shouldn't be afraid to tackle. We should take on head on. We should listen. And I think there's a very good hearings committee that will basically be able to take all the arguments and bring it back to this table. And I don't think we should be afraid to hear that.
With the speakers. Well, before I return to the mover, I personally don't have a view about Easter Sunday trading, although I'd have to say I'd probably come down on the side of not allowing trading, generally. I greatly respect those places when I travel that stick to their traditions and, you know, close from midday to 3 o'clock because that's what they've always done, or this is the Saints' Day and we've always closed. So I respect that. But I don't think this is about that. I concur with my colleagues who have pointed out that this is about asking our community what they think. And I take on board Councillor Hawkins' point that there's a value judgment and a number of value judgments to be made here. But I don't agree with him when he says we won't hear any new arguments. We will hear new perspectives. But again, that doesn't mean that the hearings panel can't take account of the arguments and the values that we already know about. So it isn't a numbers game. We want to hear what our community says, but we want to be able to analyse it. And I don't feel comfortable, regardless of my prejudices or beliefs on the matter, I don't feel comfortable just coming down on this and saying we're not going to allow the community a voice and we're not going to listen to them. We can still make up our minds as a hearing panel on the basis of all the arguments that are in here, plus what our community tells us. With regard to the review period, I agree that if we only allowed a year review, it would look suspiciously like we're only opening to take advantage of Ed Sheeran concerts. And I would actually suggest that if we specify a review period, it'd be 2 years, whereby we can compare a somewhat unusual Easter with 3 big concerts with assuming we don't get another one next Easter, with a normal Easter, and then we can look at our experience and find out from our community, for instance, if the decision were to allow for opening, whether there was abuse of employees, etc., through that period, and we'd have something to gauge it on in the review. So I won't be able to support this, although I understand the sentiments behind the motion. Councillor Hawkins, do you wish to exercise your right of reply?
I will, only briefly. I've been called afraid by putting this motion. I've been told I'm avoiding my reputational risk, which is certainly not why I got involved in this job, and if so, I'm doing a terrible job of it. And in a particularly spirited exchange, which I'll put down to youthful exuberance on Councillor Newell's part, I've been called a hypocrite by taking this stand, because I don't want to hear from people who disagree with me. And that's not my point, and not the reason why I'm proposing cutting this off at the pass at this point. I firmly believe in evidence-informed decision-making. As has been pointed out, there will always be room for value judgments, and there are a few issues that come across this table that epitomise that, like this one. I think it would be, and that's about weighing up the evidence, but also fundamentally because this hasn't existed, we'll have very little evidence put before us through the public submissions process around what the impacts will be. And my personal view is that the risk to the rights of employees to get 3.5 days off in any calendar year, as is currently prescribed, is not worth it, and it would be disingenuous to go through a process of consultation with our community and still come to the other end and say, hey, look, I still don't believe it's worth taking the rights of workers to 3.5 days off a year, because and there will be certainly new perspectives, but I can't think that I can't imagine anything that will come up through that process that will disavow me of that belief. So I understand that there's a desire to go through that consultation process. I can only hope that it is a genuine desire rather than deferral. One of Councillor Stains's avoidances of reputational risk, as he pointed out earlier on. So I couldn't in good conscience support a consultation process that I cannot believe would deliver responses from this community that would change how I feel about this. Thanks.
Okay, I'm going to call for a division on this. I think it's just going to be easier and clearer. So.
Councillor Benson Pope. Aye. Councillor Elder. Aye. Councillor Gary.
No.
Councillor Hall. No. Councillor Hawkins. Aye. Councillor Lafiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
No.
Councillor Newell.
No.
Councillor Newell. Oh, sorry, Councillor O'Malley.
Don't count twice.
Councillor Staines.
No.
Councillor Steedman.
No.
Councillor van der Vis.
Yes.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Councillor Wilson.
Yes.
Your Worship.
No.
Okay. It lost 7-8.
Okay.
I'll move option 1.
So option 1's been moved. Is there a seconder for that, please? Councillor Lord.
I'll move that the motion be put.
Very sensible. Thank you. So, as just to explain that, because the arguments have been had and there's no point in reprising them, so I will have another division though for complete clarity, please.
Worship, it's a procedural motion. We need to vote on the motion being put. So we need to vote on whether the motion.
You're quite right. Thank you for that correction. There's been a procedural motion that the motion be put. All those in favour, please say aye. Against? Who seconded that? Councillor Benson Pope. You already knew the answer. Thank you. And against? Carried. Right, now we'll have the division.
Councillor Benson Pope. Councillor Elder. Aye. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
Aye.
Councillor Hawkins.
No.
Councillor Lefiso.
No.
Councillor Lord.
Aye.
Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
No.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Steedman.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
Aye.
Councillor Wilson.
Aye.
Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried 10-5.
Thank you. Now, given the time, I am going to move from the chair that we have 10 to 15 minute break, cup of tea, refresh. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye.
Aye.
Against? Carried. Right, we'll get back into it, councillors. We're now at item 17, the electoral system for future local authority elections. And we have Ms Graham here, our governance manager. I'm not sure that's still your title.
No, but I'm sort of deputy electoral officer as well in this capacity.
It's more important by the day. Now,
That's right.
would you like to preface questions with any commentary, Sandy?
Only a very short comment, if I may. The council is required to consider this matter in advance of the next election, and the time frame is detailed here. The council can do nothing, in which case STV would stay in place, and we just then have to notify the public that that's the decision, and people have a chance to then opt for a poll to demand that we reconsider that. But you'll see that there are 4 options open to you, and this is your opportunity to decide which of those 4 you wish to progress.
Right. Questions, councillors? Any questions? I would note that all of us here are here as a result of the STV system.
We need to change it.
Just saying.
I'm happy to move the
Well, so there was a move at Councillor Benson Pope, there was a second to Councillor Staines, but just before we do, are there any?
A, because they're in the alternative.
Yes. Councillor Vandervis, I'm conscious that I'm never sure if you want to say anything, so can I invite you to make any... Are you there? Oh, good.
Thank you for the opportunity. I have in the past expressed my severe reservations about the modified STV system that we have been using these last few years. I originally voted for STV when it was first being mooted because I saw the advantages of it in places like Ireland. Unfortunately, the STV system we have has been modified by a couple of boffins who are no longer working for in the Department of Internal Affairs, and I believe it has severe problems, not the least of which are very arbitrary levels at which iterations take place. There is a completely non-transparent computer program that runs the STV system. All that the suppliers of the STV system can say is that when they run it consecutive times, it gives a consistent result. They can't actually assure that it gives a representative result. And on that basis, I have always voted, since I discovered this in 2007, against the STV system, having previously been for it. I did a lot of research on it. And my opposition to the STV system, because of its lack of transparency, because of the issues that may arise with a computer program that nobody understands anymore, I will always be voting against it unless it becomes a real STV system, or I think more simply just goes back to FPP.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Gary.
Yes,
I had a question about page 143, item 11, and I know we don't have any control over this, but it notes that a mix of voting systems on the ballot papers appears to confuse some voters, and I would concur from that from the feedback I had at the last election. Do we have any idea what the Otago Regional Council is planning to do in terms of voting system, or have they not decided?
I don't know, have the answer to that, but regardless, if the DHB is holding elections, there will always be at least one STV vote on the ballot papers as electors get them.
Further questions?
Could I point out that the DHB won't be having an election this year?
No, we know that. Yeah. Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, my question, Sandy, if you've ever done the work, but how different would this council look if we had first past the post? Have we ever done that? Do you know who you would have got?
If I may, you can't do that analysis because that's not, people don't get, for example, 14 votes under STV. It's a single transferable vote as opposed to being able to put 14 ticks in a box, so it's not possible to do that.
Councillor Benson-Pope.
Is it true that the representation review predicated the system under which we currently operate in terms of the wards and the numbers and so on the continuation of STV as the base electoral system?
It certainly was, through the Chair, a recommendation from the Independent Representation Review Panel that if we went to an at-large system, which we did, that STV best represented the community in terms of enabling that.
Further questions? Councillor Hawkins.
Yeah, thank you, Your Worship. Just following on from Councillor Gary's question, I wonder if the mover and the seconder would countenance an additional clause to this resolution encouraging the Otago Regional Council to adopt an STV system for the next round. It needs to be decided every term, and my understanding is they haven't made that decision yet. So it would be an option open to us where we'd implore them to do so.
Can I suggest that it's a perfectly valid motion, but that it be kept separate because it's of a different character to the rest, and so more than happy for you to move it. Yep. Any further questions? Councillor Elder.
I agree with Chris Gary in the sense that having first past the post STV, I do think people do get confused, and so to me, I agree with STV, but when we do stand for the next elections, that we need to explain it as clearly as possible. And I know we do that, but I'm just mentioning that people do get confused, and a number of people have talked to me about that. So, thank you.
Any questions? Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Councillor Benson-Pope, do you wish to speak to it?
Just briefly, I mean, I think I think some of the comments have been made, and there's no doubt that the composition of the councils elected under STV is a much more inclusive and representative selection from the community than is otherwise the case. Don't forget the city moved from the core city moved from a council that was almost exclusively resident in Highgate, which has led to the fine plantings and the high quality urban treatments in that area, to have a look next time you're driving, to the much more egalitarian and representative system that came through the ward system, because at least people had local representatives that they could nobble and demand action from. That spread the councillors and their location much more widely across the city, and I'm pleased that under the current system that has prevailed. I think it is a much stronger statement about the nature of our society, far from perfect yet, but much better than what the other options offer.
With the speakers. Councillor Garrett.
I think as we look around this table, the thing that strikes me is that STV allowed the voters to vote in a diverse council that represents so many facets of the community. And I think that was possibly about people getting used to the STV system and better understanding of it. As Councillor Elder alluded to, there is certainly still some confusion, but I think that a really good job was done by a variety of people outside of council circles on the education aspect at the last election. So I am thankful for STV because I think it's delivered our city a very diverse and inclusive council.
Councillor Lord.
Yeah, look, I'd just say that I'm not sure what exactly Aaron's subsequential part was, but I don't really feel that I feel comfortable to vote. If you do take it separately, that's fine. I can't support that we tell another
it will be separate.
Yeah, I just wouldn't feel comfortable telling another elected body how they should run their elections, and I think if we have an issue with the way they run their elections, we should go and put submissions to that body directly rather than do it as a one council telling another council. Yeah, we wouldn't take it very nicely if they were telling us to go first past the post to align with them, so, but I'm happy to support STV.
Right. Further speakers? Okay, for my part, I support this continuing with STV. I'd like to address Councillor Vandervis's concerns because they may be valid in some instances, but I don't think it's a matter of deciding which is the perfect system, because there isn't one. It's deciding which is the less imperfect system. And I only have to look around this table and look at the amount or the proportion of people's votes that actually make a difference in an STV election compared with the first past the post election, and I know that this is by far the superior system. So it will have its flaws, and I respect that, but it doesn't have as many flaws as the other system certainly did. And if you look at the makeup of councils under first past the post, without making any comment about the people, it delivered anything but diversity, that's for sure. So, Councillor Benson-Pope, your right of reply? No. Okay, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against?
No. Recorded, please.
Thank you. Got that. Thanks, Councillor Vandervis. That's carried. Moving on to the Constitution of the Rates Funding Advisory Panel, item 18.
Oh, Your Worship.
Oh, sorry.
That's fine. I'd like to move that this council request the Regional Council adopt the STV voting system for the 2019 triennial elections.
Is there a seconder for that? Councillor Laufiso, can I invite you to speak to that? Councillor Hawkins.
I'll get the hang of it eventually. My technician on my left is absent. No, for all the same reasons that have been canvassed in terms of why we think it is a preferential voting system for delivering this council. Those arguments all hold as to why it would be a preferential system in terms of delivering representatives of our community to the Otago Regional Council. To say nothing of the advantage of having a consistent approach across voting forms on the ballot paper, which is a barrier that has been identified to people participating in elections. So I don't see why we wouldn't encourage the reduction of that barrier by making the voting system consistent, and if we believe that STV is the fairest and most effective system of delivering a diverse range of representatives and voices to an at-large ward, which is exactly what the Dunedin ward of the Otago Regional Council is, then I couldn't see why we wouldn't support them going down that track. It was lost on a casting vote in the last triennial election. Unfortunately, Councillor Deeker had to catch a plane, but I'm optimistic that they will take the new council on Stafford Street currently will take a different view this time around, and happy for us to encourage them to do so.
Councillor Gary.
And I recall the conversations I had with people in the community, and particularly young people, as I went around schools talking to Year 13 students who were first-time voters and trying to explain to them that we have different voting systems. And in fact, at one case, we didn't even have the chance to vote at all with the District Health Board. It was a bit of a puzzlement to them, and it's not young people. It's people in our community who've voted many times over. This is a mystery to them. And as is, you know, that they don't have to vote for 14 people. But I think we're better able to educate our community about STV if we at least have a consistent type of voting throughout all of the three organisations. It allows us to educate them much more easily. I think the important, I take Councillor Lord's point, and I think the important word there is encourage. We can't tell them what to do, neither should we. But I think this gives a clear message that we're encouraging, asking them to consider the possibility of looking at this particular system. And it gives a positive message, but it's not a directive. So I'm very happy to support the motion.
Councillor Wilson.
I'm just going to ask the mover if he is prepared to consider an alteration to be Otago-wide. The problem that we're trying to do is to fix a problem for some of our electors, but not thinking that the Otago Regional Council also has Central Otago District Council, Waitaki District Council and Clutha in there, and they're all non-STV. And in fact, by doing this, you're actually increasing the problems in 3 other councils, not ours, and fixing ours. I appreciate population-wise we may be biggest, but I'm wondering why in that context you wouldn't encourage the Otago Regional Council and those other councils to adopt that to ensure that we all vote in one method.
Councillor Hawkins is the mover, so...
I'm not entirely sure what I'm being asked. In terms of what Councillor Wilson wants the resolution to look like. And I have to say I do have, to a degree, some sympathy for Councillor Lord's argument. It's different in terms of this being something that directly affects the constituents within our territorial authority. It's slightly different to then go beyond that to Waitaki and Clutha. But having said that, I appreciate that there will be downstream effects were this to be adopted. It's not at all off-putting. So I'm happy to, I'm sure it'll be worthwhile. I'm happy, if Councillor Wilson has an amendment, is it too late to amend standing orders at this point around audio conference facilities and their role in our meetings? He asks only semi-facetiously. But if Councillor Wilson has a proposed amendment, I'm happy to countenance it.
In the interest of giving you time to collect your thoughts and giving Christy time to collect Councillor Vandervis's thoughts, I'll propose that we have a brief adjournment. I'll move from the chair that we do so, second to Councillor Staines, so that you can, and we'll come back in 5 minutes. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Have you come up with anything?
The mover has, Your Worship.
Right.
Just muted myself. Yeah, it's been amended. The apostrophe is superfluous, but otherwise I'm comfortable with the language.
You want to read it, please?
Oh, sorry. For the sake of Councillor Vandervis, the motion is that Council encourage the Otago Regional Council open bracket and their constituent territorial local authorities close bracket to adopt the STV method of voting for the 2019 local body election.
Okay.
Thank you for that. Can I speak to it briefly?
Briefly? Yes. Briefly? Do you wish to speak further to this, Councillor Vandervis?
Yes, please. Councillor Hawkins has said that STV is the most diverse and most fair system of electing people. And I can't disagree that it certainly does produce the most diverse result.
Sometimes they're perverse.
However, asking the ORC to change their vote, I agree with Councillor Lord that it's really not our place to do that publicly. that if we were to try and persuade the council, the regional council, to change their voting system, we should have done that through essentially back channels. But even given that we are now doing it in this method, to ask the regional council, who I believe tend to be very much more practical, farming-oriented type of people, that they are more interested not in diversity, but in the fairness that Councillor Hawkins claims for STV, but that I would like to show is actually much more clearly a first-past-the-post system. Under the first-past-the-post system, the person with the most votes gets elected. Under STV, you do get a more diverse range of people elected, but if diversity was all you wanted, you should simply go down the street and randomly select any number of councillors, and they would be even more diverse than the diversity we've got now. So the claim that we are trying to get the regional council to change their voting system on the basis of fairness, I think is a false claim. I think that the regional council have identified first past the post as being preferable to them because they put fairness above diversity. I recognise that we seem to put diversity above fairness, but I don't think it's appropriate for us to tell the regional council to change their voting system. Certainly, if we were going to try and persuade them, this is not the way to do it.
Thank you. Further speakers? Councillor O'Malley.
I want to follow on Councillor Lord's comments, and I agree in some respects that if this comes across in the wrong way, it could appear to be a bit high-handed and like telling them. So given that they will have to go through the same process, presumably they would be able to take a submission. And I would hope that the encouragement comes in that form, that it comes with respect to the other councillors, to their decision-making processes, and does not come across as a high-handed position. So that's really the only thing I want to say in terms of that. I'll be supporting it otherwise.
Okay. Are there any further speakers? Right. Councillor Hawkins, you'll write a reply.
Only to say that were there a process for us to make submissions on this matter, I would have gone down that path. But the decisions will be made as they are here based on a report that comes to one of their meetings. So we don't have a mechanism to formally input into that. And it's certainly not my intention to appear heavy-handed in giving them this encouragement, and it is encouragement. And you know, I'd love for the opinions, collective opinions of this council to carry so much weight that it could appear heavy-handed. But that's not my intention, and I don't think the wording of this gives that impression. So I don't think we need to be concerned about that necessarily.
All right, I'm going to put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? No. Could I have a show of hands, please? All those in favour, please raise your hand. Oh, sorry, I didn't. Did you call for a division? Thank you. Lynn? Sorry,
Councillor Benson Pope. Councillor Elder. No. Councillor Gary.
Aye.
Councillor Hall.
No.
Councillor Hawkins.
Aye.
Councillor Lafiso.
Aye.
Councillor Lord.
No.
Councillor Newell.
Aye.
Councillor O'Malley.
Aye.
Councillor Staines.
Aye.
Councillor Steedman.
Aye.
Councillor Vandervis.
No.
Councillor Wiley.
No.
Councillor Wilson. Aye. Your Worship.
Aye.
Carried 10-5.
Okay, that's carried. We'll move now on to item 18, the Constitution of the Rates Funding Advisory Panel. This is something that's been was flagged some time ago as a result of a number of issues coming up that needed a bit of attention, a bit of study and a bit of thought. There's a history of having a rate that used to be called the Rates Funding Working Party, and issues around anything to do with rating. I can recall we looked at B&Bs, etc., and how we might deal with those. We'll go to questions for a start. Sandy, would you want to... Councillor Hawkins.
Thank you, Your Worship. The paper refers to a limited range of topics being considered. This isn't a complete review of the rating method. We don't have the time or capacity to do that even if we wanted to, but there's nothing specific certainly not in the terms of reference, and it's still vaguely alluded to in the report as to what the limit of that scope might be. So I'm wondering what a process might be to, and I don't expect it to happen now, what a process might be to nail that scope somewhat so as not to create any false expectation that anything under the sun is up for review, be it boutique B&B accommodation or otherwise.
If I may, what had been discussed was that at the first meeting of the panel, that these issues are canvassed, and then through the reporting mechanism that's in place, that is referred back to the Finance and Council Controlled Organisations Committee for endorsement of what has been agreed will be the priority for the panel.
But to add to that, I would have thought that issues wouldn't be sent to this advisory panel just because one or two councillors felt that it was necessary. It would take some majority consensus around this table to direct something to it.
The terms of reference, if I may, Your Worship, require that they're referred to the panel by the council or by a standing committee of council.
And is that, I guess my question then is, because this has been formed to deal with questions that have been raised, subsequent to this meeting, council or various standing committees could in theory refer any number of other issues to it. And given the timeline we have between now and the long-term plan process, that may or may not be manageable. So is it the intention that we're dealing with issues that have been raised up until this point, or opening it up as an ongoing forum for dealing with rating queries?
So there are some issues that have been flagged but not formally resolved to be referred to the Working Party around targeted rates, for example, Māori leasehold land, things that spring to mind that have been discussed by various committees, and so they will form part of the early discussions for this panel. But if council or any of the standing committees then have other items that need to be referred to the panel, they can be considered. Last time the Rates Funding Working Party spanned across the triennium and went for, I think, 6 years. And so this panel, depending on what's involved, could have some ongoing work up until the next election when the time frame ends for it.
And I further than that, note that we need to have a mechanism to consider the submission that was brought to us by the Motel Association regarding Airbnbs. And we don't at the moment have a mechanism for dealing with that, so we need to create it. Any further questions? Would someone like to move the motion on the paper? Councillor Staines, second. Councillor Lord. Would you like to speak to it, Councillor Staines? Any other speakers? There are none. I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right. Item 19, elected member remuneration rates. This is effectively for noting, since they are not decided by this council, they are decided by the Remuneration Authority. Any questions? Well, thanks, Doug. I'll just come back to you with that. Any questions about it of Ms Graham? Is there a seconder? Councillor Hawkins, do you wish to speak to it, either of you? All right, I'll put it. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried. Right, that's the end of the public part of the agenda, so I will move from the chair that the meeting move into confidential for the reasons outlined in the agenda as stated. Second to Councillor Staines. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Against? Carried.